ACI was the first formal teaching of the Geshe course to women in the world. We got some trouble from the, people told us this is not tradition. Women are not supposed to study. And this happened a few times in my life. And we just said, we don't care. We're going to teach ladies, and we're going to graduate them if they pass the Geshe content. We're going to have ACI courses, and we're going to treat everybody equally. And that was the first time in about 1,000 years. But before that, in this story, this young lady, she decides she wants to study the Geshe course. And the book is all about, as Sugeng said, this young lady named Friday. And there's many, many stories I can tell you about this book. In Tibet, sometimes they will give you the name of the day that you are born on. So which day of the week you are born on. And my teacher's name, Ken Rinpoche Geshe Losam Tarshin, when he was born on a Friday. And his name was Pasang, the planet Venus. So it has a lot to do with love. The name has a lot to do with, it means a lot to me that this young lady's name is Friday. So I wrote a book about this young lady, how she grew up 1,000 years ago in the Himalayas, how she wanted to study the Geshe course, and she's not allowed. People told her, girls don't do that, girls don't do that. And she's a very stubborn young lady. And she says, no, girls do that, girls do that. And she's gonna learn the Geshe course. So I wrote that book in my 3-year retreat, how she learned the Geshe course and how she learned Yoga Sutra, which we are doing Yoga Sutra chapter 4 in about 2 weeks. That's the last chapter. It's very important. If you have time, it's very good for you to come. It's a 2-week program with YSI, and we'll be covering the last chapter. If you couldn't come to any of the first 3 chapters, or if you missed a chapter, then I encourage you to come in 2 weeks to catch the whole 4th chapter, and we'll do a big wrap up of the Yoga Sutra. After that, the plan is to teach Hatha Yoga Pradipika. This is called Light on the Yoga of the Sun and Moon. And in Sanskrit, this is one of the first great books about how to do the actual yoga poses, how to do meditation, how to do retreat, and how to do healthy eating, and also the breathing practices. So it's a very important book, and I translated it about 20 years ago. So we'll be doing a 2-year YSI course in Hatha Yoga after we finish the Yoga Sutra. So I wrote the first book of how Friday became a Geshe, how she learned Yoga Sutra. And that book was, I think, Connie, it was 800, 900 pages. And my publisher, I sent the book out to Venerable Ellie, and she was in contact with my publisher, and he said, too long. We cannot use this book, So then I wrote How Yoga Works, which is the second part of her life. It's actually the third part of her life. So 2 parts of her life, they happen in the Himalayas. And then the third part of her life is in India, which is how yoga works. So 20 years after I wrote this book, I had some time and I got it ready for publishing. So during the YSI event, in several weeks, we will publish. This is the first of the 3 books about Friday. And we will publish, it'll be available for the first time during the Yoga Sutra Chapter 4 in 2 weeks. And we, luckily, Diamond Cutter Press, we have Rosa van Grieken, Katie Fetchenheimer, Venerable Ellie. And they worked very hard, and the ebook is going to be ready. So the ebook will be ready. In fact, the ebook production is done in New Delhi. And I met with the publisher, the ebook producer I met with yesterday here in New Delhi. And we're hoping, we have a nice idea to produce a audiobook. And many years ago, 20 years ago, when I wrote the Diamond Cutter business book, my publisher, which is the audiobook is from Amazon, a department of Amazon called Audible. And I went to their offices and I read the book. It took me a whole day. And I read the business book, and it's very popular. I think it's fun when you are driving in your car, or I don't know, you feel lazy and you're taking a nap or something, or you want to have some meaningful entertainment before you go to sleep. I think it's fun to listen to a book. My wife and I, Veronica and I, when we take a long car trip, we like to listen to great books. We just listened to Dostoevsky and Tolstoy in the car. We love to listen to the classics. And somehow when you listen to a book, to a story, it's a beautiful thing. And so we're gonna work hard on this trip, and we'll try to finish the recording of the audiobook. And then Rosa and her team, they will work very hard to take out all the hotel door slamming and things like that. So I hope we'll have this audiobook ready for you guys. In these 3 readings, I will cover 3 short chapters in each reading. And each reading will be about 30 minutes to 45 minutes. So we'll do 1 reading today, and then we'll do a second reading and a third reading. Second reading, I guess, against the 22nd, am I right, again? And then the 29th, I think. So we'll do 3 readings from Katrin. These readings, I took from it's towards the end of the book, actually. And these readings are about the debate, the Geshe debate, in which Friday wins her Geshe hat, okay? And I think this is the most fun part of the book. I think the book, I be honest, Sugang, I think honestly, it's the most beautiful book I ever wrote. It is a very beautiful book, and I'm not shy to say. And I wrote it deep in the 3-year retreat. So it has a lot of meaning for me. And I think it's a beautiful book. And it has a beautiful meaning, I think. And the main meaning is, if we really want to reach enlightenment, if we really want to help other people, if we really want to see emptiness directly, if we really want to learn the meaning of the deeper meaning of yoga and the exercises, which are important. And we had them this morning. We did a workout this morning here in India. So these are, I think this book is very helpful if you have those goals. And I think it's a very good book to introduce during the YSI programs. So the third book is How Yoga Works. The first book is called Girls Do That, Katrin. And then the second book, I'm trying to finish it now. And that's about her training in the Yoga Sutra. And that book, I'm still cleaning it up. And hopefully we'll have it done later, maybe later in this year, something like that. So there will be 3 books total. I have a 4th book in my mind, Connie, but I don't know if I have time to write it down. But anyway, let's get going. Oh, now the hotel wants to come also. Okay, here we go. Chapter 31, Something Girls Do. And by the way, the title of the book is Katrin. And this is the name of the teacher who teaches Friday the Yoga Sutra, okay, in the second book, okay? So the first 2 books are connected by the name Katrin. And Katrin is a word in Tibetan language. It doesn't exist in other languages. It's the special kindness of our teacher, okay? The word Katrin means the special kindness of our teacher. So in these 3 books, the name of Friday's teacher is Katrin, okay? And it's a little bit of a joke, and I'm the author, I can tell you these secret things. The person who taught me to write, I was one of my school teachers. She spent 2 years killing me, teaching me how to write when I was about 15 years old. And her name was Katrin Mortensen. So for me, the name Katrin reminds me of my great teacher named Katrin, who taught me how to write. And I'm very, very grateful to her. And okay, so here we go. And again, we are towards the end of the book, first book. And maybe there are some names you don't know. Just try to guess who they're talking about. I'm not going to explain it. I'm not going to interrupt Friday. Friday is going to talk, and Geshe-la's not going to interrupt her, okay? So here we go. It'll be about half an hour. Just relax, have fun. The whole book will be available at the YSI program, chapter 4, okay, of Yoga Sutra. Okay, chapter 31, Something Girls Do. Just sit back and relax. The next morning, I got up and made the family tea. I took some to Amala, who was just the same, sitting in the dark, and I sat with her for a while. I thought that she must have sensed what was going on, that this was the day her little Geshe would have stood for his final exam. But she didn't show a thing. So gang, am I going slow for translator?
No, you are. I think your speed is just nice. Or maybe you can speed up a little bit, I hope.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm going India speed, sir. Don't worry.
Okay. I think you can speak slightly faster.
Okay. I sighed and went and took Uncle his little churn of tea. Friday, excellent. Not too much tea. I have to sit for hours in that crowd today. Are you all ready to go? He exclaimed. Uncle, we still have about 8 hours to get ready, I smiled. He was as excited and nervous as a little boy. Oh, really? He said in disbelief, looking out the door to the morning sun. Oh, yes, it does seem that way, come to think of it. Everything's taken care of, he said in exuberation. A couple of your weavers from the caravan camp are coming over in the afternoon to stay with Amala until we get back. And I must say, Friday, that you have really done something wonderful with them. All those nights over there working so hard. Before he left on this last trip, your father told me that all their carpets are as fine as the ones Amala used to make, and that the families are very grateful for the extra income they get, especially when your father does the bargaining for them in the market. It's helped everyone a lot, and you should be proud. It was a day for the fruits of good hard work, and I smiled at Uncle and thanked him. Then I leaned over to pour the tea and suddenly straightened up in pain. Oh, I said, clutching my tummy. Something wrong, child? Asked Uncle with concern. I stood there and took a few deep breaths and managed to grimace. Oh, nothing, Uncle, just something girls do that time of the month. I looked about a bit in distraction and said, I'm sure it will pass. Maybe though I'll just go and, lie down for a bit. Uncle nodded and appraised me with an understanding look. Yes, by all means, go get some rest. You deserve it. And so I spent a few hours lying down in my yurt with my bored dog Longlife looking at me with curiosity. And I started to go through possible debate scenarios, waving my hands around now in earnest, because I knew that every gesture today would have to be precise. Poor Didila had not only drawn the most ferocious opponent, but the subject he was supposed to debate was also one of the most difficult in the entire Geshe course. The study of how the mind reasons things out and how it is that we can perceive and recognize the things around us. At noon, I went over and took Uncle a pretty large lunch, as it would be a long walk and an even longer ceremony. I made sure to hold my tummy the whole time, and he finally sent me back to my yurt. I laid down and practiced my hand motions and started to get an increasingly bad case of nerves. And then suddenly Uncle was tapping on my door, saying it was time to go to the Geshe debate. Oh, Uncle, I moaned, I don't know if I can make it. He came inside and stood there at the door, gazing down at me. Longlife was a really good boy, and he glanced up at Uncle with big, doleful eyes to match the mood. Uncle looked magnificent with a new set of rich red wool robes and his golden ceremonial cloak folded over his shoulder. He had his old warrior's beads wrapped around one wrist, and with one finger of his other hand, he held a small brass ring. This was sewn to a golden string that went up to his shoulder, tied there to the end of his golden Geshe hat. It was very, very old and of a very old design from India. Uncle, being a very modest man, wore it only when he was really expected to, at ceremonies and such. Geshe hats, though, are so tall and pointy that they fall down at the slightest excuse. And so the monks usually tie a string on the bottom of them and flop them over their shoulder. And they carried them like that, holding onto the string. until they get to wherever it was that they were actually supposed to sit down and put the thing on their head. Really bad, huh? Said Uncle sympathetically. Oh, yes, I'm afraid so, I groaned. And on such a day, I can't believe it. Yes, Uncle said thoughtfully. On today of all days. I can hardly remember the last time you've been this sick. Better let me check. And before I could say a word, he had my wrist up in his toasty warm hands, fingers spread out on some kind of subtle little streams of energy flowing beneath the skin. Uncle was quiet for a minute or two, and then he got up. He said, perhaps you need to rest a little more? I nodded glumly. Uncle always knew too much and never said enough. I see, he said with a slight grin. Well, I guess I'll have to run along without you. I nodded again. If you need anything, just go over to the family yurt and tell one of the ladies who's helping Amala, he said, with something like a serious tone. I nodded again, smiling weakly. He went out the door and then popped his head back in and added, by the way, don't worry about any tea in the morning. I'll be up and gone to the monastery bright and early. Some kind of meeting with visitors from out of town. Should be back by noon, I hope, and he was gone. I waited as long as I could for Uncle to get a good head start. Then when I figured I had enough time to make it to the courtyard, I got the baby sling out, rolled up one of grandmother's rugs, and tucked it under my arm, and went and told the caravan ladies I really had to get it over to the camp. Then my baby and I took off as fast as we could go, changing into the shawl and the sling at the tree near the road. I had never seen so many people in my whole life. A giant milling crowd of monks and villagers was backed up all the way out the front of the main gate of the monastery, trying to push their way past to the courtyard. I looked at the crowd and then at the late afternoon sun, and I knew we would never make it to the wall in time. And so I just set off in the opposite direction, straight across the empty winter fields to come around the back way. This meant circling the entire monastery wall, and we came out at the back of the great pavilion, just as a magnificent spectacle was starting to unfold. The entire pavilion and every inch of the floor of the courtyard was covered in a sea of golden ceremonial robes. Almost every monk wore a Geshe hat. The monastery kept a huge supply on hand for special occasions. And on days like this, they were handed out, and everybody got to dress up. Sort of good luck for those who would never be a real Geshe, just to wear the hat every once in a while. And there was a mighty chant rising up into the air, the hat swaying like a giant field of golden wheat, swinging left and right in unison, with the rhythm of great drums and cymbals, and the piercing echo of horns carved from priceless white conch shell. There was a wide aisle left open between the rows of seated monks. It went all the way from the courtyard gate to the steps of the great pavilion. A procession was flowing out of one of the gates in the monastery's main wall and making its way up the aisle. In the very front were two stout young monks with very red, very chubby faces, blowing with all their might on ceremonial trumpets. In counterpart to their blasts came the deep bass roar of the great trumpets, almost 15 feet long, supported on special wooden stands atop the roof of the main temple. And between their song flowed huge waves of sound from a great gong, nearly 6 feet across, also set on the temple roof. And so the sounds and the colors fairly struck against Long Life and I, like a strong wind, as we stood at the back wall and watched the high lamas make their entrance. First came the debate master, my dear Geshe Lothar. He wore the great cloak of his office, and it made his already sizable bulk look as big as 3 ordinary monks. A great block of red working its way slowly to the pavilion. Behind him came the precious one, the abbot, with a handful of attendants. He looked as bright and cheerful as ever, with an extra sort of light beaming from his face. The joy, I think, of all their hard work with the young monks come to this wonderful conclusion. And then came the founding father with a very special Geshe hat, incredibly high, so that he towered over the entire procession. His chin was cocked towards the sky, and he surveyed the mass of people with a cold air of pridefulness. I sensed that he was eagerly awaiting the glorious slaughter that was about to take place, as his nephew made short work of the hapless Didila. Clutching the arm of the founding father and supported on the other side by several watchful attendants, walked a very, very old lama whom I had never seen before. He wore a kindly smile on his ancient face, but it was set in a painful way, and he was obviously having trouble walking so far through the throng. I glanced at the opposite wall, the one where I would have to stand if Didila were to see my answers, my hands. I breathed a sigh of relief. Thankfully, there were very few people there, just some piles of timber stacked not far from the wall and nearly as high. I knew I could make my way around in plenty of time, and so I stood and took in the sight of the entrance of the 2 warriors. They walked side by side, slowly, in through the gate. Drum cut an awesome figure, his huge shoulders draped in new ceremonial robes of golden silk, and a Geshe hat atop his head that looked as if it had been there the day he was born. Didila at his side looked like a small child out for a walk with his father. His eyes were open wider and more scared than I could ever have imagined possible. And the end of one of the countless piles of ritual robes wrapped around him had come loose and was trailing behind on the ground, unnoticed only by Didila. His Geshe hat kept tipping over one way and then the other, so that actually he was attempting to stride down the aisle gracefully with both hands up on his hat. They made their way up to the front, up the steps of the great pavilion, and sat down side by side on the bench there, facing the huge crowd. Off to each side, up on the pavilion floor, I could see our classmates, who would each be taking their turn in the coming days. Stick was sitting tall up near the examination bench, and Hammer's broad back showed in the last row at the edge of the pavilion stage. Geshe Lothar made his way through them and took up his place as the debate master, always standing right behind the 2 young warriors. The high lamas had already climbed the steps to the top of their thrones. These were little platforms up higher than Geshe Lothar's head and were set well back behind the examination bench, shaded from the afternoon sun by the roof of the great pavilion. By the way, this is exactly how the Geshe examination is set up at my monastery. Okay. The precious one occupied the middle throne, with the founding father on the throne to his left, and the ancient one to his right. This meant that the old Lama was senior even to the founding father, and I had never heard of such a thing. I turned to a monk who stood nearby, setting torches up on the wall for lighting later on. Venerable, if you please, I asked, can you tell me who that older lama may be? Ah, he said, a visitor and a welcome one. Perhaps the greatest wisdom warrior there ever was. His name is Katrin, and he is the high abbot of the great monastery of Delek, many days' ride to the east of here. He is to be one of the judges. Judges, I exclaimed, but I thought, isn't it the custom for the precious one to serve as the judge, the only judge? It usually goes that way, replied the monk with a little smirk. But it seems like the founding father, he decided he would be a judge too. And you know, he usually gets his way around here. I groaned inside. The founding father wasn't leaving anything to chance. Even if by some miracle Didila beat his nephew Drome, Didila would still lose. And the precious one, continued the monk, he did as he always does, a little sidestep to, you know, sort of even things out. And well, my guess is that he talked the ancient one into coming to be a judge too. And not even the founding father could refuse us an honor like that. And so here he is, along with a good 100 young warriors, newly trained at their own fine debate courtyard. Why, here they come now. And we looked to the gate in the main wall, and there was a great stream of monks pouring out, dressed in maroon-colored cloaks, everyone stepping forth 3 by 3 in a quiet dignity. It occurred to me that there was no place that they could possibly squeeze in to sit. And then in the next moment, they had veered off to the right and were beginning to assemble in rows atop the timbers. And suddenly I realized why the timbers were there. And suddenly I realized why the opposite wall had been free. And then with a sinking feeling, I realized that I would never be able to get to the wall in front of poor Didila. Chapter 32, the warrior arrives. I froze then for a few moments and watched the disaster begin. The chanting and the horns and cymbals and the noise of the crowd of spectators vanished, all in an instant, and the entire scene before me was nothing but expectant silence and the extraordinary beauty of sparkling colors and devout faces. Drome rose slowly in the total silence, with a mighty look of sheer determination on his face, and took about 10 solemn strides out away from the examination bench towards the crowd. This left the terrified Didila sitting alone to one side of the seat, looking as though he might jump up and run away. Even from where I was, I could see Didila's head turning from side to side, desperately scanning the immense mass of people that had closed in on the wall on each side of the timber platform. I waited in agony for the call to battle, the first word of wisdom from the mother tongue, the sound of D. And as soon as it came, I knew it would be too late to help my brother. Drome slowly removed his Geshe hat, handed it to one of the attendants nearby, and then turned grimly to face his victim. One powerful arm came up from under the rich ceremonial robes, and with practiced dignity, he removed the corner of his upper robe from one shoulder, a salute to his opponent, however unworthy. Didila nodded back, as is the custom, and in that moment, I saw his head stop moving from side to side, and his gaze closed bravely on Drome's eyes. Whatever had happened to his savior with the baby, Didila was going to take his defeat like a true warrior. Then the most extraordinary thing happened. Drome raised his face to the shining sun and the crystal blue sky overhead and roared, D! And in that same instant, he was hurtling towards Didila, bursting through midair Didila flinched and ducked his head, and in that single graceful leap, Drome swept down with one arm, snatched the Geshe hat off of Didila's head, and still in flight, kicked off the top of the bench with one foot, spinning around in the air and landing not far from where he had started. He threw up his arm with the hat clutched in his mighty fist, and he roared out again, "D!" at the top of his lungs. Suddenly the crowd woke up. It is a custom in the great examinations for the monks looking on to join in the intense excitement, to cry out their approval or disapproval of whatever the warriors have said in that moment. And so a great murmur of astonishment swept through the crowd, mingled with a low rumble of disapproval, for this was nearly taking the traditional hazing too far. I saw a few of the older monks, the ones in front, and I knew Uncle would be there somewhere, began to wag their heads. But then suddenly Drome was standing right in front of Didila, towering over him. Drome set the hat across both his palms, and in an ancient gesture of respect, he bowed and offered forth his hands with the hat. A loud gasp of approval and relief, and then amusement broke out from the entire crowd. When Drome straightened up again, I saw him glance slightly towards the founding father. There was an almost imperceptible nod of approval, and I guessed who had planned this opening attack. Didila finally looked up sheepishly and with shaking fingers plucked his hat away. He tried to set it back on his head, but the tactic had worked perfectly. He was so rattled that there was no way he could keep the Geshe hat on. And so he just took it off and set it to the side on the bench and looked up with resignation to meet his doom. And Drome was ready to give it to him. The first questions flared from his mouth like arrows afire, and Didila's face went white. His mouth was working open and shut in a sort of spasm without a single word coming out. And when I saw this, my heart broke. And the warrior came out in me for the first time, really. I whirled from the wall and I threw myself into the massive bodies jammed against me. Now on every side, I screamed like a mad woman. "Oh, the baby, oh, my baby, he will be crushed." I clutched the red bag with long life up against my chest. "Oh, let me through, please let me through." When they had time, the startled people parted before me like magic. And if they were too slow, they were shoved to the side, or I flew around them, or I got down in the dirt on my hands and knees, and I clawed through the forest of legs with brute force, still screaming, "The baby, oh my baby." And the sun was beating down from the cloudless sky, and I was covered in sweat, the dust smeared over my cheeks, tears of rage flowing down through the dirt. I glanced across at Didila. He was taking a real beating. His mouth was working again, and he was wailing out answers in an almost incoherent anguish, but just yes or no at total random. Drome wasn't giving the least quarter, the least mercy. He drilled the questions, and when the pitiful answers returned, he stood and stared with a frank look of disdain, turning to the crowd and raising his palms to the sky, as if to say, "How did this fool ever make it this far?" And at first there were catcalls, and then louder and louder boos, and then the worst of all, the thing that pricked the rage in my heart, 1,000 monks settling down into bored but polite silence, and then turning to talk to each other about what kind of refreshments might be served. Or perhaps tomorrow's pair of warriors might be something of more interest. And I looked away again, and I fought my way screaming down the length of the wall towards the gateway of the courtyard. Chapter 33, Help from the Sky. "Can't come this way, ma'am. I looked up from my struggle and saw 3 cherubic-looking young novices blocking my way down the wall. Behind them, there was a sea of red robes spreading out against the wall, all novices, the kind that get stuck with kitchen duty. In their midst, I spotted the soot-streaked face of the master cook, shouting out directions, with stacks of wooden tea churns forming everywhere around him on the ground. Refreshments for the crowd, I realized, and nowhere to go, not even down. I looked over towards the battle, or rather, slaughter. I saw that it was still too far from the front for Didi-La to see me. She's giving secrets hand signs to Didi-La to help him. I put my hand on the wall and stood up tall there. Did I tell you I had just about grown up? On my tiptoes. On the other side of the small army of kitchen helpers, I could see the courtyard gate, still a little far off to the side of Didi-La's line of sight, but it just might work. The kitchen monks had cleared the whole area of villagers, but there, standing head and shoulders over all the red shawls, was a single farmer, a huge red-faced man with his hand resting on the gatepost, watching the warriors with a scowl that said, "All the trouble it took me to get this spot, no way I'm moving." And in fact, no one was even asking him to move. To me, he looked like heaven, my one last hope. If I could only reach him. I turned away from the wall and pushed through the people, circling around the monks, still screaming about the baby with my head thrown back and tears and dirt all over my face. When I got to the line of novices still pouring out the monastery doorway with tea churns, I just ducked down under grandmother's red shawl, and I turned into the line, flowing with them back towards the courtyard wall. In a minute, then I was near the gate, standing at the side of the huge farmer. I tapped him on the elbow, which was almost as high as my head. The scowl turned my way and glared down. I held up the baby sling, and the face broke into a kindly grin. "His uncle," I yelled, over the noise of the war and the clumps of bored conversation. "Excuse me," said the big man. "His uncle," I repeated. "His uncle. That's his uncle up there debating today. Oh, he has to see it." I pointed to my baby. "Once in a lifetime thing, you know." "Oh, right," the man yelled, and he stepped gallantly back from the wall about a foot, crushing 3 or 4 young cook's assistants in the process. "Which one is he?" shouted my hero, as Long Life and I slid up against the wall. I threw a grateful, demure smile back over my shoulder. "He's the winner, of course," I shouted back. And I turned to make my war. I stood again as tall as I could, and I tried to catch Didi-La's eye, but he was just staring out towards Drome like a mouse caught by a cat in a corner, hypnotized by his approaching demise. I shouted 2 or 3 times, but it was no good. People had spotted the tea churns, and the great debate was about to deteriorate into a raucous tea party, while Drome went on clubbing the corpse at his feet. I waved my arms, but Didi-La simply wasn't looking. I started to cry again and put my arms down on the wall and stared at them. Then it was all quiet again. But this time it was the silence that comes to me alone. I looked at Tenzin's beautiful beads wrapped around my left wrist. I felt the coldness of the wall, the stone beneath growing shadows. I looked about me in the silence, and I saw more young monks pushing torch sticks into the holes on the wall. I looked over at the 100 glorious warriors from afar, and I saw the last shaft of golden sunlight creeping up through their ranks as the sun finally touched the roof of the great pavilion. I looked up at the last of the deep blue of the sky, and the thought came to me, I wonder what grandmother would do right now if she were here. And then I heard a woman next to me, and she said, hold up the beads. I looked around, still in silence, but there were only men there, all men, the big man and the monks. And so silently I raised my beads in my left hand, and I held them there in front of my heart. Higher, the voice said, higher, as high as you can reach. And still in silence, I held up the beads all the way up, thrusting them into the blue sky. And they sank into the last shaft of golden light. And I looked up to the top of the great pavilion. And there was the sun lying upon it like a great golden egg. And in the center of the egg, there was a shape like a woman, as though she herself was sitting there on the very peak of the pavilion roof, as she had on the throne in the main temple so long ago. And then I looked ahead at Didila and saw bright blue patches of light dancing across his face. He squinted and looked up in the same moment that I did. And together we saw the golden light throwing itself across the turquoise mother bead, then splashing back in billion rays of blue. And Didila watched the pureness of the blue like that for a few long moments. And then his eyes and mine came down too at the same moment and welcomed each other. This one's for you, Tara, Grandmother Tara. I smiled, and I raised the great sword up those two little weavers' hands.
Thank you, Geshe. Thank you for the amazing story. I thoroughly enjoyed the session, and I am at loss of words about what to say too. Now, for the audience, we have a little bit of time. If you want to ask questions, please send your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So while waiting for the questions, I would like to say that this part is very, very touching. But trust me, other parts are equally touching as well. And I don't think you can put down your book if you reach this part. You just want to know what happens next. So if you have not put your order for this book, I think Diamond Cutter Press has this pre-order link. So you can go to Diamond Cutter Press website and then pre-order the book. And then you will receive it when it is out of the, when it is ready. So please do so. And we will be able to enjoy the book together. So, okay, there is a question, Geshe, from Gibson and Emily. Taiwan. We believe there is a lot of code embedded in this book. How to plant the seed to crack the code in Katrin?
That's a good question. There are a lot of secret codes inside this book. When I wrote it, I was doing many hours of meditation and Vajrayogini practice at that time during my retreat, 3-year retreat. So there are many, many secrets hidden in this book. And I don't know, I think the name of the book is Katrin. And Katrin is the teacher of Friday. It's the person who teaches Friday the Yoga Sutra and about yoga and emptiness. And as we mentioned before, the word Katrin means the kindness of your teacher. And when I read this book, I always think about my teacher because that's what the book's about. And I think if we have this attitude of gratitude towards all of our teachers, especially our mom and our dad, and then there's all the young, mean people in your grade school who caused you trouble. Those are also teachers, like Drome in the story. And then there's all your school teachers. And there's all the teachers who taught you to write and to read, which was not allowed for women in those times. And we have those teachers. We all have those teachers. And then we have our teachers, ACI, DCI, YSI. We have all of our teachers. So I think Gibson and Emily, the way to catch the deeper messages in this book is to think about the name of the book, which is Katrin, which is your teacher's kindness. Think about that title. And then I think the secret meanings in the book, and there are many secret meanings. I was in a good 3-year retreat, and they will open to you. Okay, yeah, that's my idea. Back to you, Sugeng.
Okay, thank you very much, Geshe. It seems that we don't have time left already. Okay. So here I would like to just mention that Yoga Studies Institute is a non-profit started by Geshe Michael Roach to help keep the authentic teachings of yoga in this world. So if you'd like to learn from him the most essential yogic text in the world, which is the Yoga Sutra, I would like to invite all of you to join the yoga to join the Yoga Sutra Chapter 4, which is going to happen from August 22nd to September the 2nd. So you can find the course in your language through YSI distributors. You can go to our website to find more information. And by the way, Geshe, there are, I think, almost half of the audience who are new to YSI. So I think this is a very amazing opportunity to introduce YSI to everyone.
And so I think, Sugeng, we're gonna be filming the Chapter 4 classes live. We're gonna get up in Arizona at 4 in the morning, and we'll be going to the college every day and starting the class very, very early so that people in Asia and people in Europe can both join live. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Geshe. We really appreciate all the teaching and all this amazing, amazing wisdom. So with that, I would like to end the session and look forward to see all of you on the August the 22nd. I think if you registered in our webinar, you should have received the information in the email. So once again, thank you, Geshe Michael, which is doing it live from New Delhi. And thank you to our audience from all over the world. I think we have almost 1,000 people, and we have many, many countries. I think about 20 or 30 countries in the list. So thank you very much, and look forward to see you again. Have a good. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sugeng. Thank you, Connie and YSI. Thank you. Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you, Tim, and everybody else who helped. And Sugeng. All right. Okay. Wow. Thank you, Sugeng. That was wonderful.
It's my pleasure. I think we really, I think it's a big, beautiful audience here. So thank you to all the translators and the recorders. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do this to the whole world.
She's in my house.
Yeah. So we have, I think, 6, 7 languages doing it now. We have German, we have Russian, Spanish, Indonesian, Romanian, and Vietnamese. So well done, and thank you very much.